name is Elizabeth Scarpelli. I'm the publishing director for the University of Cincinnati Press and Library Publishing Services, and I'm also a member of this year's program committee for the Virtual Library Publisher Forum. You have joined the Making Digital Monographs, Rethinking Relationships and Collaborative Models. And we are joined here today by teams of presenters from Emory, Brown, and UConn. Your panel leads are Sara McKee, Allison, Levy, and Sara Sikes. We will be holding all questions till the end. There is a Q&A option for you to type your question into. And if you happen to put it in the chat, we'll monitor that as well, but the Q&A area works just as well. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sara to start the presentation.
Thank you, Liz. And thanks to all of you for joining today. Allison, Levy, and I started talking at last year's LPF in Vancouver about how we might begin to share more widely the similar, although also different work that we're doing at Emory and Brown respectively, with funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. So it's lovely to be presenting together at LPF this year, along with Greenhouse Studios, which is the third member in our particular Mellon cohort that focuses on developing digital projects for formal publication. Next slide, please. The unusual circumstances this year have actually opened up a wonderful opportunity to include voices from our teams who might not typically be present at LPF. And so today I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Kylie Smith, Assistant Professor and the Andrew W. Mellon Faculty Fellow for Nursing and the Humanities at Emory University, and Yang Li, Senior Software Engineer for UI and UX at the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship. For the past few years, Kylie, Yang, and I have worked together as part of Emory's Digital Publishing and the Humanities Initiative, which is funded by Mellon and based at Emory's Fox Center for Humanistic Inquiry. This endeavor is headed by Michael Elliott, the Dean of Emory College, with two main objectives. First, we create ways to open up conversations with humanistic faculty across campus about open access and digital publishing. And second, we work with individual faculty to develop digital monographs for peer-reviewed publication. That second goal obviously requires collaboration with outside presses. Emory also participates in the TOME, or Toward an Open Monograph Ecosystem initiative, as a funder by providing a subvention to support open access editions of our faculty's monographs. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about TOME later, but this initiative also involves significant collaboration between Emory and our faculty's publishers. At Emory, we've identified three main pathways for faculty looking to publish an open access digital monograph. The first, which typically takes the form of a PDF or EPUB, is no doubt familiar to you all. The third path, for an interactive book that behaves in many ways like a website, will actually be exemplified today in the Brown team's presentation. But now we'd like to focus on the second path, which integrates a conventional text-based argument with digital resources. And so for the author's perspective on the collaborations involved with developing such a monograph, I'll turn over now to Kylie.
Thank you very much, Sara. I wanted to start with the two main reasons why I chose the digital humanities approach for this project. And they're really about the nature of the story and the sources I had, and also a feeling of ethical or public responsibility. People often ask me how I came up with the idea for this project, and I never really feel comfortable taking the credit for it. It was really quite literally handed to me, ironically, by a librarian. In 2017, as I was finishing my previous book, I had a fellowship at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, to look at the development of psychiatric nursing there, when Peggy Belch, the librarian in the Reynolds-Finley Library for the History of Medicine, bought me a cart full of everything she had on the history of psychiatry and mental health in Alabama. The cart had so many different types of sources on it: annual reports, letters, government documents, magazines, photos like the one that you see here, all part of a history that had never been told. And there was so much data, I didn't even know how to begin to track it all. Then in January of 2018, I was part of an NEH and National Library of Medicine workshop about using network analysis for history of medicine projects. And that made me realize that there were all sorts of digital options I could use to present the material that I was finding. At the same time, when I started talking to people in Alabama and here in Georgia about the developing project, I had a lot of people tell me that they knew someone who had lived or had worked in these big psychiatric hospitals that I was studying. And then I had lawyers and activists wanting to tell me their stories, and I knew that it had to be a public-facing project. I work in a school of nursing, but as a historian, so that proximity to healthcare practice gave me insight into how disparities in mental health continue to work today, and I really wanted to try and bridge that academic and practice divide. I also knew that I would be interviewing people, and I wanted to be able to really make a space for those voices and have them come alive. I feel like I have a particular ethical responsibility in that regard, partly because I'm white and I'm not American and I'm not from the South. So my own positionality has really influenced my desire to make this project as open as possible. But of course, a digital project requires support, and I don't think I would have been as proactive about it if we didn't have the digital humanities initiatives that we have at Emory. I started developing this project about the same time that Sara came to work with us, and we met very early in the process. Once she explained how it might work, I knew it was something I wanted to pursue. I also knew that I wanted to be collaborative about it. My experience at the Viral Networks workshop made it very clear to me that my skills did not extend to creating data visualizations, and I would really need a specialist to help with that. I also knew I wanted an active contribution from that specialist. I wanted someone who could imagine the possibilities with me, rather than just do what I wanted. Knowing that I would have support from people like Sara and the Emory Center for Digital Scholarship and all of our wonderful librarians made me think that a truly collaborative project might be possible. Importantly, I think I'm also at a place in my career when experimentation is not such a risk. Before I came to academia, I was at film school, and I'd written a number of short fiction films and also produced and directed my own documentary. So I knew instinctively that there were audio and visual possibilities for the material and stories I was collecting. But I also knew in academia, as a historian, my currency is books. What I really liked about this model that Sara was developing was that it was still a scholarly book project with all of those usual peer review processes in place, but also that it gave me the opportunity to do something bigger than just a book. And also it's my second monograph with tenure just around the corner. So I really felt like I was in a good place to experiment a little. But I knew I would need the right press and the editor for that. I'd been in talks with Columbia University Press, who had heard a very early pitch of the idea, but neither they or my current press, Rutgers, were particularly proactive about the digital part. They didn't say no, but they weren't excited about it either. So I wasn't sure what to do really until I met Lucas Church at UNC Press. Lucas was in the audience at a talk that I gave at a History of Medicine conference in May of 2018. And he came up to me afterwards and asked if I had a book in mind and a contract with anyone. When I told him I was thinking about digital publishing, he didn't flinch. His active embrace of the idea, his ability to see that my vision went beyond just a book was really the clincher. We went through the usual peer review process, and after some legal back and forth, I signed a contract in February of last year. The other decision to make then was what platform we would be using. Sara arranged a number of workshops and we looked at different options, but it was Manifold I liked from the get-go. I really like the aesthetic of it, the readability of the finished project, the way that the reader could interact with the text. I really liked the seamless way that digital assets would be incorporated into the text, and I liked that it was easy to use for both the reader and the producer. The fact that we could make this standalone instance that you see now before the final manuscript went through its regular review and editing process meant that I could also have this visible presence out in the world. I think that having this preliminary version makes it much easier for me to get the funding I need to build the resources and to facilitate the collaborations I'm trying to make. I also really liked what they called the iterative part of it, that I could publish these posts or works in progress as I went, things that might become part of the book or extra things that I might not include past publication. And some of these posts are process oriented. what I'm calling reflections, where I think through my own process as I go, and I can make these public and have a conversation with people. But it also makes the site a living document for me, almost a kind of project management, a space for me to think through things as I go. So what are our next steps? So last year I was awarded a large grant from the National Library of Medicine that's funded 3 years worth of archival work. And I was doing that work in Mississippi when the virus struck. But that first intensive archive dive really helped me to clarify what the argument will be. And it's from the argument out that I'll need to build the resources. The temptation is to play with all the shiny toys, but really the story needs to come first. So my job now is to knuckle down and start writing. When I've got that nailed down, then I'll be applying for more money from the NSF and the NEH to make all those things. And the plan from there is to work with Lucas and with Young and the ECDS to start to build the resources that actually enhance the argument that I'm making, not the other way around. And that's really where someone like Young comes in. Oops.
All right, thank you, Dr. Smith. And this is Yang Li, software engineer and information designer at Emory's Center for Digital Scholarship. So thank you, Dr. Smith, for telling the experience you have had with Manifold. So last year, we received a Manifold scholarship from University of Minnesota, which is the maker of the Manifold platform, to do a pilot, during which I have led the design and development of Emory's Manifold projects. So by working with this platform, I have learned a lot of good things about it. And I do want to emphasize 2 things out of many other features that this platform has, and that is the user experience for the producer and user experience for the reader. So Manifold is positioned as a platform to publish and read open access books online. But I really like the way that it focuses on user experience. So by saying that, this is, for example, I'm just showing you guys a couple of the demos or projects we have done here at Emory. So to the reader, it is a really content-focused, beautiful, elegant layout. It also has all the modern support for different devices, for accessibility, and use of modern technology. So it can, for example, change the way. Let me see if I am actually sharing chat box. Okay, I see. All right, so yeah, it is really optimized for the reader. It also supports annotation. So this is all very optimized for the reader. And then on the back end, just want to briefly highlight that for the producers, it is also a very well-polished backend. And also Manifold has prepared well-documented menus for producers to know what is supported and what is not. It is very well documented in the sense that I can easily find answers, and they also have a very good support community. So that is the backend of it. And then in terms of the workflow or the process that I've been using, I guess I've been providing a lot of consultation for Dr. Smith. And as what we have already seen and experienced, Manifold requires little technical knowledge. So Dr. Smith was actually able to produce a lot of the content that you saw earlier in the slides. For example, creating the reflection section and the supporting publications. And in the future, we plan to have more multimedia elements and think about potentially visualization, mapping. So those are the things that we have been thinking about, and Manifold actually provides support and accommodation for. So I have been having a great experience with Manifold, and at Emory, we are continuing to experiment with this platform and start to launch projects with other faculty members. And with that, I am going to return the presentation back to Sara. And we are ending with this slide here. All right. Oh, Sara, you may go ahead. I'm gonna mute myself.
Sorry, I was speaking with my mute on. Thank you, Yang and Kylie. And we all look forward to answering any questions you might have at the end of the session. Next up, we'll hear from Allison, Levy, and the Brown team.
Thank you, Sara. That was a wonderful walk through what is happening at Emory. And I am now going to share a bit about what's happening at Brown. Let me just get my equipment working. Okay, there we go. So I am a digital scholarship editor at Brown for our initiative, and I'm joined today by Tara Numadal, professor of history and Italian studies at Brown, and one of our faculty authors. Crystal Bruch, our designer for online publications, and also Nadine Zimmerly, editor of history and social sciences at University of Virginia Press. So let me say just a few words, and then I want to really open up the conversation to the rest of the team. Brown's initiative, which last fall received renewed support from the Mellon Foundation through 2025, establishes a university-based infrastructure to support the development, evaluation, and publication of born digital enhanced scholarly monographs. A collaboration between the university library and the dean of the faculty, the Digital Publications Initiative extends the university's mission of supporting and promoting innovative faculty scholarship, while also helping to catalyze both the practice and recognition of digital scholarship in the humanities on campus and beyond. Having arrived at a model of developing long-form digital scholarship, seeing growing interest in this effort on campus, and finding that the publisher landscape is evolving in favor of these developments, Brown is on a path to developing a viable institutional approach to the creation and validation of new scholarly forms and helping to broker their dissemination through the most suitable venues for digital publication. An advisory board consisting of 5 senior faculty from a representative range of humanities and humanistic social science fields with some experience with editorial work, publishing, or digital scholarship, evaluates proposals that are submitted in response to a call for expressions of interest, which is issued in the spring by the Office of the Dean of the Faculty. The proposals are evaluated on the basis of scholarly quality, the technological innovation proposed, the suitability of the material to a digital format, and the readiness of the faculty member to take on such a project. We currently have 6 projects in our portfolio in the fields of history, Italian studies, history of art and architecture, Middle East studies, theater arts and performance studies, and literary arts. These projects are nearing publication or are under development. Furnace and Fugue, our pilot project, co-authored by Tara Numadal and Donna Bilak, will be the focus of the remainder of our time with you today. We accept 1 to 2 projects per year, so this fall we expect this portfolio to grow to 7 or 8 projects. In my role as digital scholarship editor, I am supported by members of Brown University Library's Center for Digital Scholarship and Digital Technologies Department. My responsibilities include generating interest in the initiative at Brown and beyond through presentations and general outreach, participating in the recruitment of faculty authors and working with prospective authors to develop competitive proposals, presenting regular updates to the PIs and the advisory board, organizing and managing design and development teams, both internal and external, on a project-by-project basis, working with authors throughout the process to ensure that their scholarly argument is suitably articulated and advanced, supervising undergraduate and graduate student assistants, representing the faculty authors to presses at disciplinary and industry conferences, and working with presses on peer review, contract negotiation, dissemination, publicity, and scholarly recognition. Brown's initiative also supports a proctorship, which is an academic appointment at Brown for an advanced graduate student. The proctorship aims to build analytical, creative problem solving and project management skills that complement the disciplinary graduate training provided by the PhD programs. The proctorship also affords an opportunity to gain skills and experience that position the students for a broader range of academic career paths, such as digital humanities or scholarly publishing. And with that overview of Brown's initiative, I will turn it over to Tara Numadal.
Great, thank you. Allison, maybe you can put the next slide. Wonderful. So I'm just going to tell you very briefly about this project and then speak a bit to why we wanted to publish it as a digital publication and a bit about the collaborations involved. Here you can see me and my co-author, Donna Billack, who is an independent scholar. And so our project revolves around a 17th century printed book called Atalanta Fugiens, which rereads the classical myth of Atalanta from Ovid as an alchemical recipe for the philosopher's stone. The original book was published in 1618, and it was multimedia in a 17th century sense, in that it included both musical notation, images, and text. And the book was also interactive, which we argue it was intended to be read out of order, with readers sort of charting their own path through the book and using it as an epistemological tool in order to generate new insights into alchemy, into nature, and into God. So our digital publication here, Furnace and Fugue, takes these two core elements of the 1618 book and sort of thinks with them to reimagine the book, the early modern book, as a 21st century scholarly born digital publication. And so our book, Furnace and Fugue, includes two parts, but they're really integrated in some pretty complex ways. So it is, on the one hand, a multimedia and multilingual digital edition of the text. It includes a translation, new recordings of the music that you can listen to, and so on. And it also includes a set of new scholarly essays about the book. And as I say, those things are integrated. If I can have the next slide, Allison. I wanted to tell you a bit about how this came to be and how we decided to publish it as a digital publication. This project began with my collaborator, Donna Billack. It's okay if the slides don't go, who was working on this book, Atalanta Fugiens, as a postdoc project. So this is one thing that I want to sort of pick up on Kylie's point and speak to the different career stages that people, begin these projects with. So I was a tenured professor. I was completing my second book. Furnace and Fugue was my third book. Donna Billack came to this from a very different position as a postdoc, as a recent PhD. She had a fellowship at the Chemical Heritage Foundation of Philadelphia, and was studying this book, and quickly realized that because the 1618 book itself was so interdisciplinary and really required an understanding not only in the history of alchemy, which was her own training, but also music and art history and book history and mathematics, she very quickly reimagined her own postdoc project as a kind of interdisciplinary collaboration. And she was able to organize a workshop in 2015 to bring in scholars from all sorts of disciplines and book curators and some digital humanities people, and for us most delightfully, singers, to gather together to discuss this book and sort of play around with it. When we came to the end of the session, the typical question appeared, what should we do next? And we thought, well, let's publish a collection of essays. That's always what comes out of these conferences. And this really coincided with Brown getting this Mellon grant and beginning to think about digital publication. And so I thought very quickly, this book, this 1618 book, really lends itself to digital publication in ways that other things I had worked on had not. Not only could we imagine including sound in the book, but it was really also that interactivity and the ability to access different audiences. So scholars, but also singers, practicing alchemists, and students. We held a second workshop at Brown to explore, again, to imagine, how a digital environment might allow us to expand this book. But it was always really important to us for this to be a scholarly publication. Although my tenure did not depend on it, Donna was still interested in participating in academia, and she continues to do so. And for me, it was important that this go through all the usual peer review and so on, as Kylie mentioned earlier. So I'll just leave you with one last comment before turning it over to Crystal to talk a bit more about the ongoing collaboration. For us, the scholarly question at the heart of Furnace and Fugue has to do with the history of knowledge, and particularly fields that kind of bridge theory and practice. And so for us, this digital environment allowed us to make that argument more effectively by incorporating some of the practice and allowing our readers to actually practice with the book today in the way that we think 17th century users would have used that book, right? They can hear it and practice it and rearrange it and engage with it in a sort of bodily sense in the same way we think 17th century users did. In order to create this project, we relied on an enormous team of people. So I'm going to turn that over to Crystal to speak to particularly some of the technologists and speak to how this kind of scholarly interdisciplinary collaboration, expanded into one that included designers and digital people as well. So.
Thanks, Tara. So my name is Crystal Bruce, and I'm the designer for digital publications at Brown University Library, and I'll talk briefly about some of the features that we built into Furnace and Fugue, as well as the design process, which includes a lot of people, as Sara said, and some of the challenges we encountered on the way and are still working through. So first, one of the initial questions that we had at Brown was how to take advantage of the capabilities of the web in order to present and support scholarship. So start from the top right, what we did in Furnace and Fugue is we used some thoughtful animations in order to do things like annotate images and highlight some of the notation in sync with the text. Moving down to the bottom left, we also built this collection space where people are able to reinterpret the book how they wish. You can reorder pages, you can collect things using various themes, you can explore facets that we created for the image in order to detail some of the very specific imagery that happens in these engravings. And you're also able to cross-reference some of those facets to see how they work across the book and across the images. And finally, you're able to share what your research is in this collection space with other researchers and other classmates. Then finally, in the bottom right, we have the digital edition. And that does several things. Like Tara said, it allows you to explore the book in various languages. We have English, German, and Latin. But it also allows you to bring the music that was in the book to life. Before, he had static notation. And now you're able to hear the three voices. You're able to manipulate them, layer them, turn them on and off. And we also have this piano roll visualization that allows people who may not read music to actually see some patterns that are not explicit. So go to the next slide. Our design and development is both handled in-house in the library as well as with outside studios. So we had to work very intimately in order to get that to be a seamless collaboration. But we had sort of 3 layers of design before going to development. So I'll go through that. First is design research, where our team at the library is just interviewing the authors, we're interviewing stakeholders and trying to, like Tara said, determine who the audience is and to rank them. Eventually that's going to be sort of your guiding force as you answer questions and things come into conflict and you have to make decisions. You're always referring back to that audience. And then finally, analyzing similar products and publications. So we start with sketching ideas out on paper, then moving towards wireframes, which you see in the top pictures. And in the bottom, we take those wireframes and make them into these more detailed mock-ups. And those eventually get built out into interactive prototypes, so we're able to do testing and sort of validate our ideas and go back to the drawing board if something doesn't work quite the way we imagined. But finally, we're also documenting all of our choices, all of the feedback we get in each of those steps. This is an example of our Trello board. it's crazy, but it's something that everybody can manage and everybody can contribute to. And that's another way that we are able to collaborate effectively. So go to the next slide. Finally, I just want to show some of the testing that we did. This is one of Tara's classes that ended up using an early version of the site. And here, one of the interesting things, I think one of the most interesting things that we realized was that students really wanted to zoom in on the images. And at the time, that's not a feature that we built. So we went back and ended up creating that and ended up making it into the final project. But it's just an example of how you always have to sort of work quickly and work on your feet in order to get like the best feature. So other things I just want to go through quickly is accessibility. It's another thing that we're working through. We always follow the WCAG level AA for our project. And then platform, we decided to go with a static site because we weren't sure which publisher we were going to work with when we started developing. And I think I'll hand it off to Nadine now so she can talk more from the publisher's perspective.
Thank you, Crystal, and thanks for having me. So here you see our catalog page, and we're very excited to publish Furnace and Fugue in July. So its publication is imminent, and I saw that we only have about a minute left, but I just quickly wanted to tell you from the publisher's perspective that Furnace and Fugue was a really exciting project that Allison brought to our editor-in-chief, and at University of Virginia Press, we do have a digital imprint, Rotunda, already, and we are also looking at new partnerships to collaborate on open access publications. And this seemed like a perfect fit because we have a series, the Studies in Early and Modern German History series, that is always looking for innovative texts, and this is about as innovative as you can get. From the publisher's perspective, this is really new for us. And we had to basically treat this as a pilot project for us from the peer review through the marketing stages. And I just wanted to quickly let you know about a few of these stages. On the peer review stage, it was really important for us to have reviewers look at both the content of the introductory essays and the more topical essays and be able to assess the site as an electronic resource. And we were lucky enough to find scholars who had digital humanities backgrounds and a background in early modern German history that were able to do both. And just really quickly, some of the challenges we encountered after the peer review hurdle was contract negotiations. Actually, we had to go to an entirely new template and consider who would maybe retain hosting rights if Brown ever were not to host the site anymore, and which state law applies, Rhode Island or Virginia, to this type of collaboration. And an interesting notion that also came up was ISBN numbers. Should we have it or should we not assign one? And as you will see on the slide here, we did assign an ISBN number because it's important to us that scholars can treat this as a publication and include it, that Tara, for example, can include it in her portfolio like she would any monograph for tenure and promotion purposes. Currently, we're in the copy editing stage, just really quickly, which has involved additional layers because the site already exists. So copy editing had to happen sort of after the text was already implemented into sort of Brown's infrastructure, but I think we moved through that rather smoothly. And now we're looking forward to the marketing rollout in July and August. And we're going to treat this like any publication, so it is in the catalog. And then we're going to have some really exciting rollouts, social media posts, blog posts, promoting this virtually because it is a virtual product, but also hoping to get it reviewed in journals and presented as conferences. And the last thing I want to say is that Furnace and Fugue prompted us at Virginia to buy an iPad finally for our booth so that we can present this product like we would any monograph at conferences, which we will hopefully all get to attend in person again soon. So thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you, Tara and Crystal and Nadine. And that does it for Brown's presentation today. I will pass it off to Sara Sikes.
Great, thank you, Allison. I'll just wait just a minute for our slide deck to start. Perfect, thank you, Brooke. So today we're presenting on a case study from Greenhouse Studios at the University of Connecticut. And our approach to scholarly publications at Greenhouse is a bit different, as we work with a model of collaborative authorship rather than single author monographs. The mission of Greenhouse Studios is to explore the problems and opportunities of scholarship in the digital age. And one of the main ways that we do this is through a collaboration-first approach to scholarly communications. Our research initiatives each begin from a project prompt or problematic, and the projects then evolve based on the strengths and interests of the team members at the table. These team members each bring a skill set that contributes to the overall research and development of the project, and include content experts, librarians, technologists, designers, graduate students, and academic press partners. And the panel members here today, Tom, Brooke, and Wes, are representative of some of our project team members. Next slide, please. So the case study that we're presenting today is a game-based teaching tool that was originally titled Convivio. A main element of the gameplay is based on personal evaluation of a proposed scenario, and if that scenario is overrated or underrated. Now, in the finalized version of the game is simply known as Overrated. As I mentioned, when embarking on a new initiative at Greenhouse, we begin first and foremost with a question or problematic and the strengths of the team members at the table. This project was initiated with a prompt focused on humility and conviction in public life, which illustrates a balance between the showing of conviction for one's belief while still remaining open to the opposing views of others. As stated in the prompt, we looked at the question of how is it possible to combine principled conviction, the sort of conviction people show on issues such as religion or morality, with intellectual humility about those very convictions. Next slide, please. It's with this thorny question that we launched our project team for Overrated. Each project at Greenhouse is guided by our design process model as illustrated in this slide. The approach begins with people and a prompt, and then moves through phases of understanding the question at hand, identifying sources of knowledge and inspiration surrounding that question, building up a project in either a digital or analog format, because we do work on both formats, then working with an academic press to send the project out for peer review, and finally disseminating the project to the public, along with marketing, assessment, preservation, and access. Through this model, we really look to address some concerns of the current scholarly publishing workflow as it pertains to digital works and non-traditional forms of publication. And the teaching tool Overrated is just one example of our approach. I'm now going to turn it over to Tom Lee of the Greenhouse Studios, one of the Greenhouse Studios design technologists and a member of our project team, who'll talk a bit about the design of the gameplay for Overrated. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Sarah. So after our team spent some time digesting the humility and conviction in public life prompt in our first couple meetings, we set forth a few primary goals for the project. And the first is to encourage a real heart-to-heart discussion around values and principles as they relate to our daily lives. And to go farther than that, we also wanted to create an incentive structure for people to really listen deeply to each other and understand each other's thought processes, with the goal that we'd be able to extrapolate those thought processes across a variety of topics. And finally, we wanted our product to be something that was accessible and appealing to a wide audience. So we wanted an experience that would be approachable and fun and avoid the appearance of being stuffy and academic. The next slide, please. So the game format borrows from a pretty popular format for discussion-based card games, which uses two separate decks. In our instance, we have two decks, one called Action and the other Intention. So actions represent sort of a behavior that one might have or an action you might take, and intentions represent a rationale for why one might do a certain thing. So this is an example of a prompt that you might end up with. You have taking an entire year off to discover yourself, to prove something to yourself. And so these, as a quick note, these aren't really written to match any specific card, but they're sort of meant to be generally interchangeable to an extent. Next, please. So the way that the round is structured is the prompt is, the action card is flipped, and then the player who's designated as the guesser for that round chooses an intention card from their hand. Then the voters consider the prompt. The remaining players are the voters, and they determine on their own basis whether they think the prompt is overrated or underrated. And the guesser will proceed to guess each of the voting players' responses, and they will accrue a certain amount of points based on how many correct guesses they made. And so you might be wondering exactly how that works, and the answer is there's a lot of ambiguity, which is part of the challenge that we decided was of central importance to this game. So being able to figure out what people value or react to in the prompt is a major challenge that the guesser faces. Next, please. So I'll just highlight a couple of the collaborative activities that took place in the development of Overrated. And so we relied on people to, as a team, evaluate existing games and determine what we want to borrow from games on the market already and what we want to avoid. We started out with a simple draft of the game, but we, through playtesting in various venues at conferences, in classes, casual meetings with colleagues, different groups around the library, and elsewhere, set out to refine the rules, mechanics for the gameplay, the overall structure for the gameplay, and then also craft the voice, determine what topics were covered in the prompts, and really find a voice for the game. We also spent some time designing different iterations of graphic design for the game and creating that appeal aspect that we wanted the game to have. So to talk more about that, I'll hand it off to my colleague and counterpart, design technologist, Brooke Gemmel.
Thanks, Tom. So as Tom mentioned, we had iterations that revolved around graphics. These are some initial concepts that were sketched by one of our GAs, Wenchao Liu. And really what these were relying on were trying to get at what iconography we may use, what colors, typefaces. As Sara had mentioned, the original name of the game was Convivio, which loosely means banquet or gathering, having to do with food, which had its own pitfalls, and how we were going to design around that. There at one point were food icons that just weren't ever going to work, and trying to get at what do action and intention look like? What do overrated and underrated look like graphically? And in the top right is an example of an early scoring system we have that adapted dice to both show possession of points and accumulation of points. None of this was quite fitting right. And I guess another point on this too is that all of this, while we as designers may have worked on it, you know, on our own machines, we'd bring it back to the group and everybody would look at it together. So none of these were quite hitting what we needed them to. So we took a step back and reviewed what the aspirations were for the design of this game. One of the big ones is the ability to reach the target audience, which is pretty much college age and high school age. However, we want something that has shelf appeal. So if this was on the shelf, something that would jump out to you that you would want to pick up. We also needed something that would be cohesive and consistent all across the board. So from the box design to the cards, to the point tokens, something that would flow together well, which didn't really work out as neatly with the original designs. And then legibility and accessibility are two huge things that we need to focus on. That's not only physical legibility and accessibility, but also intellectually. I think an issue that we tend to have is being a little bit heavy on the academic jargon, and in a game, you don't always want that. So that was a challenge for us. And And as Tom mentioned, it should be fun. So we wanted something that had a little bit of personality to it. So step one to that was just totally changing the identity, which as a designer to think about rebranding before you've even officially branded is a weird process to do, but I think it really helped us. So we, first of all, got away from Convivio as a title because people were like, what the heck does that mean? So we went with Overrated, and we really just pared it back to deal with typography and color, to see, you know, to really just let the game speak for itself, not overcomplicate it, and keep it accessible to a wide audience. So this is an example of some of the experiments of experimenting with type and color. And this is something that I would have printed out and put on the table for the group to look at, which is pretty much what this document is. And so, as I said, this was kind of deciding what colors we'd land on, what layouts of typography we would use. And we also had an idea of versioning this game. So there would be something starting, you know, all the way up at a premium version that would have wood tokens, wood rating cards, all the way down to a print and play version, which would basically be something you would download for free and print yourself. So we wanted a design system that would kind of scale through those versions. And then something that, I mean, there's a lot of card games out there that are sentence building based. So we wanted to try to design something that would be a little bit more unique to us. And so moving into prototyping and production, that's where we are now. Just some key questions to that are scalability. That's, you know, how many units are we producing for peer review? How many units will we want to produce generally? And, you know, that kind of brings back in the question of the premium version down to the print and play, how we produce those things, and questions such as, you know, what will the cost per unit be? A lot of that will be answered soon. And these are examples of some prototyping experiments of cutting the wood tokens, how those would look and feel, as well as some sketches on the box design. So now I'll turn it over to our Mellon Fellow, Wes Hamrick, who will talk about some questions in publishing. Hopefully. Wes, if you're there, you may be muted still. Okay.
It looks like Wes is still muted. I'm wondering if he's having issues with the connectivity though.
I've just unmuted him.
There we go.
You just unmuted him?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can.
Great, yeah, my internet just went out for like, right when I was about to come on. Okay, so at Greenhouse Studios, we've been working with UMass Press to study peer review and publication workflows for digital and multimodal scholarship. But most digital and multimodal projects never involve a university press at all. They're simply published on the web or distributed through some other means, such as Google Play or the App Store. And I guess one key exception here would be the digital monograph that a lot of folks are talking about today. However, we're discovering that there are real benefits to publishing non-traditional scholarship through more conventional processes with the university press. One of these benefits is peer review. Even though digital scholarship is no longer new, it's still very much in the stage of experimentation and discovery. By contrast, print scholarship has well-established mature conventions for assessment, validation, and publication. Moreover, the quality of digital humanities and multimodal research projects is somewhat uneven. Some make substantial contributions to scholarship, but others are more like experiments or proofs of concept. The peer review processes used by university presses can be a big help here by improving the overall quality of the work and by ensuring that projects make a substantial scholarly intervention. And I think Allison described this really well in terms of the digital monographs that she's working with at Brown. By extension, this concerns validation. The imprimatur of a university press serves to validate that a project does in fact meet certain standards for quality and original scholarship. And in terms of marketing, university presses can help with marketing and publicity. just like peer review, presses know really well how to publicize scholarly works so that they reach their target audiences. When most multimodal or digital humanities projects are self-published, the marketing and publicity are left to the authors or collaborators themselves. And as often happens, even with the best digital projects, scholars have moved on to other projects, and their work on the previous project fails to gain the traction and attention that it perhaps deserves. Next slide, please. So in order to test these things out, we've decided to submit Overrated to UMass Press through the same channels that they currently use for printed books. So even though UMass Press is our partner in Mellon-funded research on these questions, they may choose not to publish Overrated after all. But even if our proposal is ultimately rejected, we will still learn a lot about how to make the process work for other multimodal projects. So some of the challenges here include things like authorship. So one of the features of this game is the instruction booklet will include 4 brief essays by some of the collaborators. And so it's fairly straightforward to think about authorship for the essays. However, the authorship of the game itself, and we have 9 project team members, is a much more complicated question. Certainly more complicated perhaps than for a digital monograph. Chapter summaries, so beyond the 4 essays that we're publishing, we don't really have chapters. So our book proposal ticks that box by describing the components of the game and the gameplay. Those sort of serve as chapter summaries. In terms of word count, we have about 100 cards in each of the 2 decks. However, the cards can be played in thousands of different combinations. So the question of word count is a bit more complicated than just the number of words printed on paper. And then when it comes to submitting a manuscript and conducting peer review, whereas a monograph could simply be emailed to the press and then sent out to readers for review, we have to consider how to send a physical prototype of the game and then have that sent out to, quote, readers for review. And the same would be true, for example, for a virtual reality experience that requires special equipment. So we're learning about that issue as well. If you have a virtual reality experience, do you send out the equipment to readers? Do the readers come on site to conduct testing? How do you accomplish that? That's something we hope to figure out in the near future. But peer review for the Overrated game requires more than simply reading through the text. We expect that reviewers will need to play the game, which will require them to, which will require either a group of readers, quote unquote, who play the game together, or else each reader or reviewer will have to find their own group of people to play the game and to test it in order to conduct peer review. And then finally, the final challenge is the question of costs. So subventions come in here. We imagine that the game will have a very different cost structure than a conventional printed book. But it may be the case that if the game is popular, it'll sell more units than would, say, a scholarly monograph that's published mainly by university libraries. So to help on that front, we have subventions that are funded by the Mellon Foundation for this research that can help subsidize the additional costs of both the publishing of the game itself and the cost involved in conducting peer review. And from that, I think I'll turn it back over to Sara Sikes.
Thank you. And Brooke's already gone to the next slide, which just shows the team members on this particular team and all their kind of different roles outside of their greenhouse work. And with that, I think we'll close as we're running out of time, and thank everyone for presenting. And I believe we're going to open it up for questions, but I'll turn it back to the moderator.